Behind the towering stone walls of Ohio's most infamous prison, the dead still serve their time. Welcome to the Ohio State Reformatory, a place where shadows crawl across cell block walls, where whispers echo from solitary confinement, and where the scent of roses signals a ghostly presence watching you from the dark. From violent deaths and demonic sightings to one of the most haunted places in America, this is no ordinary prison. This is Mansfield, and its inmates may be long gone, but they never truly left. Hey everyone, quick word from yours truly here. I wanted to let you know that I have several partner channels and have made a network of sorts to start to branch out a bit. Of course, Mystery Archives will always remain my primary focus. With that being said, I'd like to announce Missing Persons Archives, which is a brand new channel that I'm a part of. Every week, we'll dive into the world's most chilling missing persons cases, those that remain unsolved, unexplained, and unnervingly quiet. From sudden disappearances in national parks, to vanished college students, to mysterious cold cases with bizarre clues and eerie last sightings, we'll cover them all, and we'll do it with empathy, precision, and a relentless pursuit of truth. Now, just so you know, I may do a guest narration here and there, but this is a channel all on its own, with its own narrator. But I wanted to let you know about it, and I would really and truly appreciate it if you give the content a chance and subscribe to support it. I appreciate you all as always. And now, let's get back to today's video. In order to tell this story properly, we must first start at the very beginning with its history. The story of the Ohio State Reformatory begins amid the turmoil of the Civil War. In 1862, the site in Mansfield, Ohio, was Camp Mordecai Bartley, a training ground for Union soldiers. After the war, Mansfield leaders lobbied for a new state prison on that very field. In 1867, the city raised $10,000 to buy 30 acres, and the state added $20,000 more for another 150 more acres. This would become the Intermediate Penitentiary, envisioned as a halfway point between the Juvenile Reform School and the State Penitentiary, a place for young first-time offenders rather than hardened criminals. Construction officially commenced with a grand cornerstone ceremony on November 4th of 1886. A crowd of 15,000 gathered for a parade and speeches by dignitaries, including former President Rutherford B. Hayes. The prison's architect, Levi T. Schofield of Cleveland, took inspiration from German castles for a design that was at once intimidating. The imposing structure blended Victorian, Gothic, Richardsonian, Romanesque, and Queen Anne styles. Its stone facade evoking a fortress-like castle meant to encourage inmates back to a rebirth of their spiritual lives, away from their sinful lifestyle and toward repentance. By 1896, the main cell blocks and administration building were finally ready for use. On September 15, 1896, the Ohio State Reformatory, or OSR, as it was renamed in 1891, opened its doors to the first 150 inmates who arrived by train from Columbus. Locals turned out to watch the procession of prisoners in striped uniforms, and the newcomers obligingly waved and cracked jokes as they marched to the train and then to their new cells. The prison was not even finished yet. Those first inmates were immediately put to work mixing concrete, digging the sewer lines, and erecting a 25-foot stone wall around the 15-acre complex. Construction of the sprawling facility would not be fully complete until 1910. Supervising architect F.F. Schnitzer whose name is on the cornerstone, was honored in 1896 with the silver inkwell for overseeing the monumental project. When finally done, the reformatory was one of the most expensive and striking prisons of its era, and it was considered to be one of the best in the country at the time it was built. Under its first wardens, the Ohio State Reformatory pursued an optimistic mission of rehabilitation. It accepted young men who had committed moderately serious crimes but were deemed salvageable, inmates too old for juvenile corrections, but more minor than those that sent others to the Ohio State Penitentiary. The institution truly aimed to reform rather than merely punish. And in practice, that meant a strict but progressive regimen. Inmates attended chapel for religious instruction, were given education in academic subjects, and learned trades like plumbing, engineering, or carpentry to prepare them for an honest living. Most men were sentenced to an indefinite 18-month term. If they demonstrated good behavior and self-improvement, they could be paroled after that period. If not, they were kept another 18 months for further reform. In the early years, this approach appeared successful. OSR reportedly boasted one of the lowest recidivism rates in the nation, as many first-timers left and took advantage of their second chances in life instead of reoffending. The prison's castle-like architecture, with its grand arched entry and light-filled corridors, was intended to inspire inmates rather than crush their spirits. For several decades, Ohio State Reformatory was held up as a model, a place that must not only penalize, but furnish the incentive for convicts to remake themselves into law-abiding citizens. But beneath this veneer of hope, however, discipline was strict, and the penalties for disobedience could be harsh. Solitary confinement, also known as the hole, awaited rule breakers. Inmates worked long hours in prison industries and on the prison's farm, and still, no major disturbances marred the early decades. There were even a few lighthearted moments. In 1921, two clever young inmates managed to run a counterfeiting ring inside OSR, printing fake $5 bills and slipping them to the guards to spend outside. They were caught by a suspicious superintendent and handed over to federal authorities upon release. Such stories aside, most prisoners did their time quietly and earned their release. By the late 1920s, however, two ominous trends were developing. The inmate population was rising, and a new class of more dangerous prisoners was appearing within OSR's walls. In April 1930, tragedy struck the Ohio State Penitentiary in Columbus. A horrific fire tore through that overcrowded penitentiary, killing 320 inmates trapped in their cells. The thought of being trapped and burning to death is an absolute nightmare scenario, in my opinion, and one of the worst ways one could go. It remains one of the worst prison disasters in U.S. history to date. In the aftermath, surviving convicts from Columbus had to be dispersed to other prisons. Many of those transferees were hardened, violent men, the worst of the worst, rapists, murderers, and lifers. An Ohio State Reformatory was forced to take in hundreds of them. This influx in 1930 to 31 utterly changed the character of the facility forever. The Serene Reform School for Wayward Youth now housed seasoned criminals, gangsters, and desperate repeat offenders. The population swelled well beyond the prison's design capacity, and conditions quickly deteriorated. Cells built for one now held 2, even 3 men in the bunks. Resources were strained, and tensions ran high. As one paranormal tour guide later observed of OSR's mid-century turn, Men who were incarcerated here had terrible pasts and had a terrible time here. There was a lot of violence in the cell blocks. On November 2nd, 1926, just prior to the Columbus fire influx, a 72-year-old night watchman named Urban Wilford was posted at the West Gate when a recently paroled former inmate crept back into the prison. The ex-con, named Philip Orlick, had returned armed with a revolver, determined to break out a friend who was still inside. Wilford surprised Orlick during the attempted prison break and was fatally shot in the struggle. Orlick fled, but authorities captured him 2 months later. He died in the electric chair at the Ohio Penitentiary the following year. Wilford's killing sent a shock through the staff. It was a grim first for the reformatory, and unfortunately, not the last. Less than 6 years later, on October 2nd, 1932, Officer Frank Hanger was making the rounds near the solitary confinement block when he stumbled upon an escape plot in progress. A dozen inmates crammed into the hole after a failed riot or disciplinary roundup had managed to overpower a guard and were attempting a breakout. Unarmed and alone, Hanger tried to stop the group. The prisoners swarmed him, and one struck Hanger in the head with an iron bar, inflicting a mortal wound. The 48-year-old guard died as a result of his injuries. The escape attempt was squashed, and all 12 conspirators were brought under control. 2 ringleaders, Merrill Chandler and Chester Probosky, were convicted of Hanger's murder and were executed in the electric chair in 1935. To this day, some say the spirit of the guard still stalks the solitary ranges. Visitors on ghost tours claim an unseen presence sometimes jabs them with a nightstick in the darkness, as if a guard killed in solitary confinement back in 1932 were still doing his rounds. Such tales, though unverifiable, highlight the lasting shadows these violent episodes left on the prison, and more on that later. By 1933, inspectors and journalists were noting that Ohio State Reformatory had become dangerously overcrowded and unsanitary. Cells intended for one man now held 2 or even 3 inmates in double-decker and triple-decker bunks. Disease spread easily in the tight quarters, and inmates idled under lockdown for long hours due to staffing shortages, breeding frustration and conflict. The lofty reform ideals of the early 1900s were now giving way to the brutal realities of an overfilled penitentiary. Yet, even as OSR's conditions worsened, a reform-minded administration tried to maintain some humanity. From 1935 to 1959 was Arthur Lewis Glattke, a former Mansfield police officer and a politically connected appointee who surprisingly proved both principled and progressive. Warden Glattke was widely respected by staff and prisoners. He introduced small quality-of-life improvements. Famously, he installed a system to pipe in music so that radio tunes would echo down the cell blocks, easing the oppressive silence. Glattke's tenure stabilized the institution for a time, but even he could not prevent the next wave of bloodshed that arrived in the late 1940s. On a warm July night in 1948, 2 recently paroled OSR inmates unleashed one of the most shocking crime sprees in Ohio history. Robert Daniels, age 24, and John West, age 23, had met as cellmates at the reformatory. Upon release, instead of going straight, they teamed up and armed themselves, later telling police that they felt abused by the prison and wanted revenge. On July 10, 1948, Daniels and West robbed and murdered a tavern owner in Columbus, then killed an elderly man the next day at a tourist camp. Flush with stolen guns and a getaway car, The pair then set their sights on Mansfield. In Daniel's own words, they drove to the Ohio State Reformatory intending to target a specific guard, one who had mistreated them, a man they called Red Harris. Failing to find Harris, the vengeful ex-prisoners turned their attention to another OSR employee, 50-year-old John Niebel, the farm superintendent who lived with his family on the reformatory's honor farm just outside the main compound. In the early hours of July 21, 1948, Weston Daniels knocked on the door of the Niebel farmhouse under the pretense of car trouble. When Superintendent Niebel answered, they pushed inside at gunpoint. They gathered Niebel's wife, Nalana, and a 20-year-old daughter, Phyllis, from upstairs and forced the terrified family into the criminal's car. As they drove the hostages out of town, Daniels cruelly ordered the family to strip off all of their clothes and throw them out the car windows, an act meant to degrade and prevent escape. Finally, on a secluded country road by a cornfield on Fleming Falls Road, the car stopped. In the pre-dawn darkness, Daniels marched John, Nolana, and Phyllis Niebel out into the high corn. He lined the parents and daughter up side by side, and one by one, shot each of them in the head with a stolen Mauser pistol. The cold-blooded execution of the Niebel family sent shockwaves through Ohio. The Mad Dog Killers, as the press soon dubbed Weston Daniels, fled the scene and continued their rampage. They hijacked a truck carrying new cars, murdering 2 more men in the process. A farmer in Tiffin and a truck driver from Michigan who refused to hand over his keys. A massive manhunt spanned the state, one of the largest in Ohio's history. In less than 2 weeks after the first murder, on July 23rd, the fugitives were spotted at a roadblock near Van Wert. In a final shootout, John West was killed by police gunfire, and Robert Daniels was captured alive. The reign of terror lasted 13 days and left 7 victims dead, including OSR staff member John Niebel and his family. Daniels showed no remorse. He was tried, convicted, and in January 1949, he sat in Ohio's electric chair to pay with his own life. The horrific Niebel family murders cast a long shadow over the Mansfield Reformatory. Inside the prison, inmates whispered that the place was cursed. Administrators tightened security on the honor farm and reconsidered parolee policy. The very next year brought another tragedy within OSR's walls. This one, an eerie incident. On November 5, 1950, Warden Glattke's wife, Helen, was upstairs in the warden's private apartment, which was part of the administration wing, getting ready for church. She opened a closet to retrieve her jewelry box, not realizing a loaded revolver was hidden on the shelf. As Helen moved the box, the .32 caliber pistol slipped out and hit the floor, discharging a bullet. The shot struck Helen in the chest. Hearing the bang, Warden Arthur Glattke rushed to find his wife collapsed and bleeding on the bedroom floor. The prison doctor was summoned, and Helen was raced to Mansfield General Hospital. She never regained consciousness. In the early hours of Tuesday, November 7th of 1950, Helen Bauer Glattke succumbed to her wound at age 54. Her death was ruled an accident. The bullet had pierced her left lung, leading to pneumonia. Nevertheless, dark rumors swirled among inmates that the warden's quarters was haunted by grief. Arthur Glattke carried on as warden for 9 more years following this event, but colleagues noted that he was never quite the same after losing Helen. On February 10, 1959, Glattke himself died suddenly at the age of 62 of a massive heart attack in his office at the reformatory. After nearly 25 years at the helm, the reformer warden's era was over, and with it, the last vestiges of the old idealism seemed to fade. To this day, some visitors claim Warden Glattke and his beloved Helen never really left OSR. People touring the administration wing often report unexplained cold drafts or electronic devices inexplicably malfunctioning in the old living quarters. In a bathroom with pink tiles, Helen's favorite color, visitors and guides have smelled the strong scent of floral perfume where no source exists. Several have even glimpsed the figure of a woman in that area, or in the former library, a lady in early 20th century dress who vanishes when approached. These experiences are attributed to Helen Glattke's ghost, lingering lovingly in the home where she unfortunately met her tragic end. Such tales, of course, again, are unverified, but they persist as a part of the prison's lore. By the mid-1950s, the Ohio State Reformatory had earned a reputation for harsh and inhumane living conditions. The population pressures continued to mount, and in 1955, a prisoner in OSR's East Block, despairing of his fate, took his own life in his cell via hanging, one of many events to occur over the years. A few years later, another inmate committed a horrifying act of self-destruction. He doused himself in turpentine, likely stolen from the prison paint shop, and set himself on fire, dying in agony. Such incidents underscored the mental breakdown and hopelessness afflicting many incarcerated men. Then, in 1957, violence exploded in a way that revealed just how extreme the conditions had become. A prison riot erupted. Accounts vary on the cause, but the result was a large number of rebellious inmates being rounded up for discipline. In response, OSR's officials decided to make an example of the troublemakers. Approximately 120 prisoners were crammed into the hole, the tiny solitary confinement dungeon, for 30 days. This area had only 20 solitary cells, each intended for one man in total darkness. With 120 men to punish, guards jammed 6 inmates per cell on average, a dank, pitch-dark place of confinement where the men slept on bare concrete floors. They were denied light, adequate food, or sanitation, and many of these prisoners began to lose their sanity after weeks in isolation. According to later rumors, at least one inmate was murdered by his cellmates in the hole during that hellish month. His body allegedly hidden under bedding for days before guards discovered the crime. Whether or not that murder truly occurred, the 1957 solitary punishment was very real, and it exemplified the brutality that had seeped into the reformatory's operations. Each veteran staff began to agree that OSR had become a nightmare. Official reports in the early 1960s documented peeling paint, rampant mildew, and vermin infestations. Overcrowding was so bad that at times, single inmate cells held up to 6 men at a time during disciplinary crackdowns. A culture of violence pervaded the cell blocks. Inmates fashioned shanks and fought each other. Gangs preyed on the weak. Beatings and even rapes were not uncommon. One inmate, as legend holds, was so terrified of his predatory cellmate that he waited until the man slept and then slipped a noose around his neck, strangling him to death in the night. Another time, 2 men entered a solitary cell, but only one came out alive. The survivor had killed and then stuffed the other's corpse under the bunk. These are the kinds of gruesome tales that haunted OSR's reputation. Life in the reformatory could be agony, filled with hate, violence, and insanity. And many who died there carried those dark emotions to the grave. The 1960s brought a shift in state policy that sealed OSR's fate. In the early 60s, Ohio withdrew support from the reformatory model of indeterminate sentencing and education. The idea of gentle rehabilitation had fallen out of political favor amid a nationwide spike in crime. Instead, Ohio State Reformatory was formally converted into a full maximum security prison, a function it was never fully intended for. As one account notes bluntly, by 1969, OSR was housing inmates convicted of first and second degree murder, lifers with no chance of parole. The tender young first-timers of 1896 were long gone, and in their place were career criminals and the most dangerous offenders in the state. With minimal funding for upgrades, the already aging facility slid further into disrepair while trying to confine a more violent population. Fires broke out, guards were killed, and men took their own lives as a result of the conditions. One of those fires may have been a 1968 blaze that damaged a wing of the reformatory. Though details are scarce, each year more inmates attempted to escape or riot. In 1971 alone, there were dozens of assaults on staff and several jailbreak attempts. It was as if the Grand Stone prison itself was rebelling against its purpose. This castle built to uplift souls had become a cauldron of despair. By the 1970s, public outrage over prison conditions were growing louder. The final push came from outside advocates, the Council for Human Dignity, a coalition of civic and religious groups, took up the inmates' cause. And with the help of some former prisoners, it filed a federal class action lawsuit in 1978 on behalf of the 2,200 men confined in Ohio State Reformatory. The suit alleged that being packed into brutalizing and inhumane conditions at OSR violated the prisoners' constitutional rights. After years winding through the courts, the case, Boyd v. Denton, was ultimately settled in the inmates' favor. In 1983, U.S. District Judge Frank Battisti approved a consent decree ordering that the antiquated reformatory be closed. The state was given a deadline of December 31st, 1986, to shut OSR's doors for good, by which time a new modern prison would be built to replace it. The end of the Ohio State Reformatory was now on the horizon. Despite the court order, bureaucratic delays and construction problems slowed the opening of the replacement prison, the Mansfield Correctional Institution, or MANCI. Thus, the old reformatory remained in operation past the 1986 deadline, forcing Judge Battisti to extend the closure date. For the inmates and guards who had endured a few extra years in OSR, it was a bitter extension of misery. Finally, in the summer of 1990, the last prisoners were moved out. On December 31st, 1990, the Ohio State Reformatory officially closed its doors as a state prison. After 94 years of continuous use, the Intermediate Penitentiary was no more. In total, over 150,000 inmates had done time at OSR during its existence. More than 200 men died within its walls from illness, murder, or self-harm. The empty cell blocks were left silent, save for the scurrying of rodents and the occasional trespasser. For several years, the massive Victorian prison sat abandoned and decaying. Nature and vandalism began to take their toll. Paint peeled, plaster fell, and windows broke. The state of Ohio, which still owned the property, saw the old prison as a liability. In 1993, a film crew arrived in Mansfield with an entirely different vision for the site. Director Frank Darabont had chosen the defunct reformatory as the primary filming location for the movie Shawshank Redemption. a prison drama set in the 1940s. For 3 months in the summer of 1993, Hollywood lights and cameras brought life back to OSR's dark halls. Once finished, the movie was released in 1994 and became a beloved classic and put the Mansfield Reformatory on the cultural map for millions who marveled at the Gothic architecture on film. Almost immediately after Shawshank finished filming, the state proceeded with demolishing parts of the old complex. In 1994 to 95, all the outbuildings, the mess hall, hospital, workshops, and the enormous concrete perimeter wall were all torn down. The land was needed for the adjacent new correctional institution next door. It seemed likely that the iconic main structure of OSR might be slated for the wrecking ball as well, but a group of local preservationists and history enthusiasts sprang into action. They formed the Mansfield Reformatory Preservation Society, or MRPS, in 1995, and convinced the state to sell some of the historic prison for the token price of $1. Thanks to the grassroots effort, the grand old building, with its 6-tier cell blocks, chapel, and administration offices, was saved from demolition at the 11th hour. The reformatory had been added to the National Register of Historic Places in 1983. This was while it was still operating, which helped underscore its historical significance. And now, under MRPS stewardship, plans began to stabilize to restore the crumbling facility. In the late 1990s, volunteers and contractors labored to clean out debris and make the reformatory safe for visitors. They patched roofs, removed asbestos, and rebuilt damaged sections. The warden's residence was fully restored to its 1950s appearance, and the central guard room between the east and west cell blocks was refurbished to its former grandeur. By the early 2000s, the Mansfield Reformatory Preservation Society had officially opened the site for guided tours. What began as small local history tours soon blossomed into a major tourist attraction. Today, more than 120,000 people visit annually, exploring the 250,000 square feet of prison space, from the rusting cell tiers to the very spooky basement. The reformatory houses multiple museums under its roof as well, filled with all sorts of artifacts from Ohio's prisons, as well as a Shawshank Redemption Museum, displaying props and set pieces from the movie. Meanwhile, the dramatic ambiance of OSR continued to draw filmmakers and even musicians. Even before Shawshank, 2 Hollywood productions had shot scenes at the active prison. Harry and Walter Go to New York in 1975. In the Kurt Russell Sylvester Stallone action movie Tango and Cash in 1989, both used the reformatory as a backdrop while it was still an operating prison. After Shawshank made the site famous, more productions followed. Harrison Ford's Air Force One in 1997 filmed its opening Russian prison break sequence at OSR in 1996. Music artists also found inspiration there. Rock band Godsmack shot their video for their song Awake in the dark cell blocks in 2000, and rapper Lil Wayne filmed parts of his Go DJ video inside the prison's stone corridors. Through the tourism and Hollywood interest, the once moldering prison had thus found a new life as a vibrant museum and cultural venue. However, the echoes of the past were just around the corner. A place as old and bloodstained as the Ohio State Reformatory naturally attracts ghost stories. With over 100 years of anguish and death concentrated in one structure, OSR has earned a reputation as one of America's most haunted sites. Even during the prison's operation, rumors circulated among the inmates of something otherworldly lurking in the cell blocks. Prisoners reported being woken up at night by unseen hands grabbing at them in the dark, or by the clanking of phantom chains and keys when the guards on duty were stationary. Men would whisper about strange moaning sounds in empty cells and corridors. Some were so frightened they barely slept. As one modern article wrote, complaints were recorded of invisible hands, along with unsettling noises keeping them awake. And in those days, guards too occasionally admitted to feeling that they weren't alone on the tiers during late-night watches. These accounts were usually kept quiet. Hardened convicts and stoic officers rarely wanted to admit fear, but they laid the groundwork for OSR's ghostly lore. After the prison closed and tour guides began leading nightly ghost hunts, the trickle of stories became a flood. Paranormal investigators flocked to Mansfield to test their courage in the infamous cell blocks and solitary cells. The Reformatory has since been featured on countless ghost hunting TV shows. Ghost Adventures, Sci-Fi's Ghost Hunters, and many, many others have all filmed episodes inside OSR. These investigators and thousands of amateur visitors consistently report similarly eerie phenomena. Common experiences include disembodied footsteps echoing down cell ranges that are completely empty, sudden pockets of frigid air on hot summer days, and shadowy human figures fleeting at the edges of one's vision. Audible voices are frequently captured on recorders, sometimes faint whispers, and other times blood-curdling screams or growls that have no logical source. Many people claim to have been touched or even shoved by invisible forces. Tour guides have reported being poked, having their hair pulled, or even feeling a hand over their shoulder when no one was near. On at least one occasion, a visitor was seemingly pushed on a catwalk, as if some restless soul relished a bit of cruelty. Flashlights and cameras are known to malfunction mysteriously, especially in the hotspots like the infirmary and solitary cells. Certain areas of the prison have developed their own ghostly reputations. The administrative wing, where Warden Glattke's quarters were, is one such hotspot, not only due to Helen's alleged presence with her flowery perfume, but also because people sense the warden himself. Some nights, a figure in a suit has been seen peering out of Arthur Glattke's old office window, only to vanish when approached. The prison hospital on the 3rd floor is another epicenter. Here, hundreds died over the decades, from tuberculosis, influenza, and neglect, as well as injuries. Visitors often see flickering shapes or moving shadows in the infirmary doorways, and many feel an oppressive sadness or nausea in the former sick ward. Electronic equipment frequently goes haywire in the infirmary, as if the spirits of feverish inmates still linger where they had drawn their last breaths. Directly above the infirmary sits the old chapel, and despite being a place of worship, the chapel now has an unsettling aura. Both guides and guests have witnessed a mysterious man who peeks out from behind doors in the chapel balcony and quickly ducks away. At first, they assume it's a living person playing a prank, yet when they investigate, the balcony is empty. This playful apparition in the chapel remains unidentified, but is seen so often that some staff have nicknamed him the Creeper. Down in the cell blocks, nearly every corner has a story. Cell 13 on the 4th tier, to pick one example, is feared for an inexplicable sense of dread that develops in anyone who steps inside. The most dreaded location of all, however, is the Hole, the solitary confinement dungeon located in the basement. Here, in near total darkness, countless inmates suffered and some perished. The Hole is widely cited as the most sinister location in the old prison, a place saturated with negative energy. Visitors today report instant goosebumps and nausea upon descending into the Hole's corridor. Many refuse to go inside the tiny cells at all, and those who do often regret it. People have emerged pale and shaking, claiming that they felt something in there with them. Investigators have recorded disturbing cries and pleas on their audio equipment in the hole when no one else was present. Others have heard distinct footsteps tapping on the concrete behind them, though no figure was visible. A few particularly brave or foolhardy individuals have even attempted to spend the night alone in the hole cells during overnight ghost hunts. They usually don't last too long before fleeing, as one author vividly put it. One does not need any psychic abilities to feel the intense energies of this area. The history that has been imprinted on the stone walls of the hole seems to be making its presence known to anyone who dares venture there, whether these sensations are purely psychological or truly paranormal. They are powerful and consistent. Not all of OSR's ghostly lore is so ominous, however. There are also tales of a forlorn boyish spirit in the basement, thought to be an adolescent inmate who was beaten to death in a long-ago torture session. People occasionally see a fleeting figure of a man in tattered 1930s-style prison garb wandering the dim service tunnels. If addressed, he reportedly vanishes or runs off into the shadows. In one anecdote, a guide sitting alone in an empty cell block heard the distant chiming of church bells, a peculiar sound inside of a stone prison. Moments later, he smelled the distinct odor of a campfire, even though nothing was burning. A visiting investigator interpreted these as ghostly traces of the 1930 Ohio Penitentiary fire victims. He said, "You know how your clothes smell after sitting around a campfire? If inmates came here from the fire, with their clothes all smoky, I believe that's what it is." Indeed, many of the paranormal happenings seem to be tied to specific historical events. The growls and malevolent feelings in the hole echo the cruelty of the 1957 riot punishment. The apparition of a guard in the corridor evokes the fallen officer hangar from 1932. The faint smell of gunpowder and a woman's weeping heard in the administration area recalls Helen Glattke's tragic shooting. In this way, the Ohio State Reformatory's violent and painful events of their individual pasts appear to replay themselves in uncanny ways, imprinting the environment with residual hauntings. Despite countless investigations, none of these paranormal claims can be proven with certainty. No ghost has ever been definitively recorded at OSR, and skeptics suggest that natural explanations, such as echoes, drafts, and imagination, underlie many experiences. The reformatory staff are careful to distinguish legend from fact. The documented history of OSR is tragic enough on its own without embellishment. Yet even pragmatic tour guides have been known to admit that this place held a lot of violence and a lot of suffering. And if anywhere might be haunted, perhaps it's here. Haley Statham Kitzler, a historian who works at the prison, candidly calls OSR the most haunted place in America. And if it's not the most, it's up there for sure. She recounts how, while sitting alone in the empty administrative wing, she distinctly heard footsteps ascending the stairs to the guard room when no one else was there. Greg Fedekik, a seasoned paranormal investigator, attests that Ohio State Reformatory is one of the eeriest places to be. Skeptic before he came, he said that I'd never seen an apparition or shadow person before, until one night I was sitting right there in OSR. He watched in disbelief as a shadowy figure climbed a prison stairwell, turned, and walked down a hallway before fading away. As he sat astonished, he then heard a deep growl emanate from a nearby room. This was then followed by the inexplicable sound of distant church bells ringing inside the cell block. Moments like these have convinced many investigators that some of OSR's former residents may indeed linger in spiritual form. Of course, such claims remain claims. The ghosts of Ohio State Reformatory or anywhere cannot be booked for an interview or truly definitively measured, but they live in an abundant anecdotes and in the popular imagination, and potentially in our reality. For visitors, the line between history and legend at Mansfield is part of the thrill. One can stand in the very cornfield where the Nebel family met their end, then later stand in the dim cell where an unknown prisoner scratched his name into the brick. The MRPS has embraced this dual identity of the site. It is at once a sobering historic landmark and a celebrated paranormal destination. By day, one can tour the prison as a historian or film fan, and by night, one can prowl the cellars with an EMF meter hunting for specters. Both experiences speak of the reformatory's unique allure. The saga of the Ohio State Reformatory is a classic American tale of rise, fall, and rebirth. It began with 19th century optimism, a palace-like prison meant to reform wayward men. It witnessed nearly a century of triumphs and horrors, the hopeful beginnings, the dark turning point in the 1930s, the bloodshed of mid-century, and the decay and brutality that ultimately shut it down, and its abandonment that narrowly escaped destruction, only to be saved by those who value its story. Now, it stands preserved, a hulking limestone monument to the past. Within its echoing cell blocks, one can still feel the weight of lives that have passed through it. The 16-year-old first offender trembling on intake, the cynical career criminal plotting escape, the guard making his final round one fateful night, the warden cradling his dying wife, the prisoners cheering a moment of freedom as they left this place forever. All these moments are frozen in the reformatory stones. Perhaps this is why the legend holds that not all things have moved on. Today, a visitor to Mansfield can walk the same cells where blood was once spilled, then perhaps feel a cold touch on their shoulder that makes them wonder. You can admire the beautiful stone chapel where convicts once sang hymns, and you might catch a glimpse of a phantom figure watching you from the balcony. The Ohio State Reformatory leaves it up to each guest to decide what is real. As you exit through the metal doors and into the Ohio sunshine, one thing is certain: the presence of the past is palpable here. The grand old prison on Reformatory Road stands as both a historical time capsule and, as many believe, a spiritual lockup where no soul is getting out. Its story continues to captivate, a chronicle of darkness and redemption written in brick, iron, and perhaps in echoes from beyond the grave. Thank you guys so very much for watching this latest video. I did want to quickly mention that there is a theory surrounding limestone and that it tends to capture and store energy, allowing for residual or imprint hauntings to more frequently occur in its presence. This one was a blend of history and mystery, and I hope you liked it. If you did, please like the video, subscribe, and leave me a comment down below. Consider grabbing yourself one of these awesome new shirts or blankets, or I've got books or hats or really anything that you're looking for to help support the channel at mysteryarchives.myshopify.com. Or you can support my work by clicking join now here on YouTube, or by visiting patreon.com/mysteryarchives to become a channel member and gain access to all my content ad-free, plus even more bonus content. I do apologize that these videos tend to take a good amount of time to create, but they are a labor of love, and I do not take your patience or support for granted. I truly appreciate you all from the bottom of my heart, and I could not be prouder of this incredible community. Anyways, that's all I've got for now, guys. This has been Cody here at Mystery Archives. Stay safe out there. Don't go to prison, physically or spiritually. And I'll see you next time. Until then, watch one of my other videos popping up now, or check out one of these playlists. And take care.